You need immediate help about FOI, she knows her stuff. She knows her stuff. So don't ever hesitate. See, I'm gonna make you work now. So the other piece, I mentioned it's about access to two basic things. It's about access to public meetings and access to public records. I'm gonna read two pieces of the definition of a public record. Just kind of listen to the word. Public records or files means any recorded data or information relating to the conduct of the public's business. Prepared, owned, used, received, or retained by a public agency, or to which a public agency is entitled to receive a copy by law or contract. Whether such data or information be handwritten, typed, tape recorded, printed, photostated, photographed, or recorded by any other method. Except as otherwise provided by any federal law or state statute, all records contained or kept on file by any public agency, whether or not such records are required by any law or by any rule or regulation, shall be public records. And every person shall have the right to inspect such records promptly during regular office or business hours, copy such records in accordance with subsection G of 1-212, or receive a copy of such records in accordance with 1-212. Bottom line is, every record held, created, used, reviewed by any public agency is defined as a public record in the state of Connecticut. And in theory, anybody can come in and ask to inspect that record, or can make a request for a copy of that record. Now, if it were that simple, there's no reason for us to be here tonight. On top of those base definitions, there are what we call in the FOI business the 3 E's. There are exceptions, there are exclusions, there are exemptions to disclosure. Tom, why are you telling us that everything's a public record and then telling us that we have these things that take the... Because lesson number one that I found is that we sometimes tend to get really possessive. And we forget that it's a public record. They're Plainfield records, you can't have them. They're zoning records, you can't have them. They're conservation records, they're EDC records, you can't have them. Or we get selective. You look like a nice guy, I'll give it to you. I'm not so sure about you. And you used to be a reporter, out, you get nothing. We have to remember that it's not about that, and it's hard sometimes. We have any, I mean, not here, any difficult people, perhaps, you know? And there's a tendency to say, we don't like him, or we don't like her, so we're gonna make it hard for them to get the records. You have to look at what the record is, remembering that it is a public record, they're not our records, and then decide whether or not any of those exemptions or exceptions apply. I hesitate to use this story because we're on camera, but it's kind of a neat example of what I mean about remembering that it's not about who's asking, it's about the fact that things are public records. The requester in this circumstance, this is the city of Hartford, God bless them for giving me this. The requester, will call him a quasi-journalist. He does a blog, he does a public access TV thing. He is around a lot. He's around to the point where they're kind of tired of him. But he's got his rights. And in this case, he asks Hartford for, I think, it's a simple thing, a record of bills submitted to the city on behalf of a law firm doing work for the city on the outside, and then a record of payment from the city to that law firm. So, the Corporation Counsel, the attorney for the city of Hartford, our capital city, responds, I have your FOI request, and will coordinate the response. Such documentation as is allowed or required by law will be provided. Now folks, if any of you deal with the public and records request, you should always respond in 4 business days. This is an example of a response. There's nothing wrong with this. If you have the records, obviously give them out in fewer than 4 days, but at the very least respond in 4 days, because the law says that if you don't, you've denied access. So always respond in 4 business days. So this fits as a 4-day response. So why am I reading you this? Because in the process of responding to this individual whom he does not like, the Corporation Counsel lost sight of the fact that everything's a public record and accidentally copied the guy on an email he had written to somebody else about how much he didn't like the guy. Everything is a public record. So attached to his response for records is the following. Turn that off, and I will I'll clean it up, but you'll get the idea. Carl, so who lit a fire under this? It's a bad word that starts with an A. If he's involved in litigation, ongoing and or other projects that he has asked about, can I shut him down? So his response isn't really, thank you for your records request, I'm looking into it. How do I get rid of it? So the guy runs with this. He puts it on his blog. He puts it on the public access TV. And he's connected. It's on WFSB at 6 o'clock. It's in the Current the next morning. Hartford looks horrible. The Corporation Counsel says, this isn't good. And so I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is City of Hartford letterhead. City of Hartford letterhead. He tries to write a letter sort of walking it back, I guess is the phrase we use today. But he can't do it. In his letter of apology, it's the following. Apparently you have little else to do other than to pester me in this office and other city departments. Recall that I do not work for you. The purpose of the FOIA statute is not to provide you a playground. Guys, advice, even if you think it, don't write it, right? He's created a second public record, which basically goes into the record requester, into the law, and he looks really bad again. Think. And the worst part from an FOI standpoint, that's the funny part, the worst part of the FOI is because it was him, he never bothered to look at the request. He gave him nothing, and the next headline is Hartford loses at FOI commission. We can't lose sight of the fact that the law gives everybody the right to records that are not exempt. So what happens when somebody comes in and makes that massive request? What are we supposed to do? Well, not in the law, but the first piece of advice is, how many of you, by the way, have to deal with people in records requests? A few of you in the room. The first piece of advice is to have a conversation with the requester. Have a conversation. The guy from DSS called today, Department of Social Services. He says, I've got a request here. I'm not quite sure what to do with it. The guy gave me some search terms from email. We gave it to IT, and it produced 52,000 emails. And because we have client information on many of them, each and every one of those will have to be reviewed. What do I do? And my advice to him is what I give to you. I hope you don't ever get a 52,000 one. But have a conversation. Do you really need 52,000 emails? Can we help you narrow the scope of that request? Technically, we're not supposed to ask requesters what they want the records for, what they're going to do with them, what they're trying to find out. But if you say, look, we'll give you the 52,000, but it's going to take a long time. And if we can narrow the scope, maybe we could work something out so that you get the records that much more quickly, you find out what you need to know that much more quickly, it's less work for us, and oh, by the way, it costs you less money because they're a state agency, they can charge 25 cents a page. Municipal agency can charge 50 cents a page. So when somebody asks for records, and there are thousands of pages, and you tell them, well, once you give me the 350 bucks up front, that could change the conversation too. You have a right to get your money if the cost of the copies exceeds $10. You can get your money up front without making a single copy. So, that's another thing to do. You would be surprised. I wish I could tell you that it worked every single time. It doesn't necessarily. But you would be surprised at how often and how well it works to have that conversation. To have the conversation and people are saying, oh gee. And what happens is they realize you're not trying to hide anything. You actually are following the law. You are being transparent. You are letting the sun shine in, let people know what you're doing. They find out what they need that much more quickly, and everybody's happy. Now, Tom, what do we do when it doesn't work? Because occasionally you will get those, okay? Here's what you need to remember. When you get a request for records that's enormous, and people won't budge, and you won't have a conversation, okay? She's leaving. It's okay. But you have the conversation. They won't budge. What do we do? What is our defense? Well, the Freedom of Information Act says that people are entitled to access records promptly. Would anybody like to take a shot at what that means? Because it's not defined in number of days or hours. Well, that went to court because nobody really knew what it meant. The court said, we got your back on this. Promptly means without undue delay. Well, bad news is it doesn't help that much, but the good news is that you're sensing that there's got to be a reasonableness here. There's got to be so And how do we figure that out? Well, you figure it out. You know that somebody's on vacation. You know that the records that they're asking for are down in the basement next to the pool. You got to pull up. I love that, by the way. You bring the records up, and it's going to take hours. It's going to take weeks. So you frame a response that is without undue delay, that is with reasonable, and say, okay, here it is. It's going to take us 6 months because there are a lot of records. The guy today, 52,000 emails, he guessed that it would take up to a year to produce the records. And if somebody files a complaint, he's prepared to show that because there are 52,000, and we don't know how many pages, by the way, each one of these is, and each one has to be reviewed, and they've got other work to do, a year could be prompt. Now, 30 seconds could be prompt too. You don't want to make people wait sometimes because it's sitting right there, you give it to them. It doesn't mean that every time somebody makes a request, you make them wait 4 days. Promptly, without undue delay, reasonableness. And that's what you do so that people have the access they need. We have one guy who, between 2011 and 2016, filed almost 450 complaints against various agencies in the state. Many of them, frankly, were not realistic. Many of them were frivolous. And we reached the point where he had abused the process to the point where we had to stop hearing his complaints. Now that's the whole thing too. We've got to go to court, but we stopped hearing his complaints because, but even he, when he walks in and wants to see a record of ours, there's a temptation, but if it's a record that's not exempt, we would give it to him. Or look at it, or tell him, come back tomorrow when we review it, because even he has a right to our records, as crazy as he makes it.
How do you reconcile the labor cost of that?
We don't. There's no cost for labor because the law assumes that we as public servants, part of our job is to provide access to records. Now, this law was written 43 years ago. It did not envision the extent to which we have all these electronic records and all these things like that. At some point, I imagine that will be built into the law, but no one has taken it up. Our role is to enforce the law. The legislature writes it at this juncture. The only fee for labor that's allowed is if to extract records from a computer stored situation, you have to do programming or formatting to get it out. Otherwise, there are no labor fees. There's no labor fee. And that's across the board. That's just the way it is. So that's why in a promptness situation, okay, here's my job. I've got an 8-hour day. I'm giving it a half an hour today, half an hour Wednesday, that sort of thing. And if it takes 6 months, if it takes a year, so be it, because I have other things to do.
Just wondered if you could mention about creating a record.
Nothing in the FOIA Act, she should be sitting up here with me. Nothing in the FOIA Act requires a public agency to create a record that it doesn't have. You're not required to make a record. You're not required to do research for somebody. You come in and ask for a record that exists. If you have to look for it, that's a different story, but you don't have to create it and you don't have to do research. What makes, and this is the part where, because many of you are board members, I'm going to cut it back, but if you have specific questions, ask. What makes the compliance with the records provision so difficult are those exceptions, and exclusions that I told you about. There are many. Some of them are not in the FOIA Act. When we talk about exceptions, I don't know if you caught it, I said except as otherwise provided by any federal law or state statute. That means that if there's a federal law or a state statute on the books that says thou shalt not release, it overrides the FOIA Act, and you wouldn't give the record out. The problem is there's no list of those anywhere. So you kind of have to know what records are covered by what federal statutes, and so it means you really got to look at the books, because we don't have a list. Nobody has a list. Our legislature has a tendency to slip them in there and not tell anybody. So you want to just have some idea of what the statutes say about the particular records that you're dealing with. Again, this is funny. I got a lot of different calls today that are relevant tonight. A woman called an attorney. There was a request for information about a library card. And in the statute, crystal clear is it's a record you can't have. except as otherwise provided. Particular information was not available, except as otherwise provided, can't have it, FOI would be prohibited. But I didn't know that, because I did at least have the intelligence to ask her, is there anything in statute anywhere? She says, yeah, well, I'm reading the statute that says they can't have it. And I said, that overrides FOI, that's the end of the discussion. So you need to know what they are. I talked to you about one that might be interesting to you. And again, so let me just back up for a second. Those are what we call the exceptions. There's an exclusion that says you don't give out the home address of certain people, judges, correction officers, police officers. That's been narrowed. It was narrowed about 6 years ago. It doesn't involve tax records. It doesn't involve land records. It doesn't involve voter records. The best example would be, let's suppose you're a police officer and you're on the Park and Rec Commission. Somebody wants a list, home addresses of all the Park and Rec Commissions. They want to write a letter. Yours would be blacked out because you're a police officer. That's how that would work. The third of those 3 E's, the exemption, those are in the FOI Act. They're in section 1-210, and there are 28 of them. What makes those complicated is that they are called permissive exemptions. I mentioned the one for bids and RFPs. It's a permissive exemption. If you decide you don't want to withhold them, give them out. You're allowed to withhold, not required to withhold, and those are, so on those types of records, you got to make 2 decisions. And the records in those categories run the gamut. The major law enforcement exemptions are in there. Records that if they are part of pending claims and pending litigation, they can be withheld, those are in there. Records that if released would be a security risk, those are all in there, you get the idea. So you want to, if you deal with the public and records, you want to look at those and have some idea of what's in there. The thing that I want to leave you with about records, in addition to just having some idea that these exemptions are there, if you get a records request, you want to look at them and see if it applies. Don't use gut feeling, because when I said sometimes your intuition takes you here and the law takes you here, is to remember back to the beginning of this records discussion that everything is a public record. Look before you send. Look before you write. Understand that something you think is benign, it may wind up being a public record that gets in the newspaper's hands or the radio station's hands. You have to understand that it becomes a public record. And it doesn't matter where you are when you create it. Oh, I was working at home. I was at my desk at work. It was my phone. If it has to do with Plainfield business, and your board or your commission, it's a public record. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to come grab your phone and look at everything, but if I ask for every text message about topic X, and they're still lodged on your phone, you'd have to find a way to take them out and give them to me. Again, only if it has to do with public business. I took a phone call a couple weeks ago from a woman. She said, hi, my name is Sean. I said, hi, Sean, how are you? She said, good, I'm calling you from Georgia. Georgia? Who's calling Connecticut FOI from Georgia? She says, yeah, my husband's an out-of-state contractor, and he had a job in Connecticut last summer. And I think he had an affair with a state worker. Why is she calling me? It wasn't me. Why is she calling me? What does she want? She wants to see that worker's phone records, emails, texts. My answer to her is, okay, Sean, if there's an email that says something like, meet me at the construction trailer at 6 o'clock, we'll review the blueprints, and then that's a public record. She could get it. She said, good, it'll help me with my divorce. You get the idea. Understand that if it, I can't stress that enough. Get up and walk down the hall, go talk to somebody, because when you put it in writing, it's a public record and it could see the light of day. And obviously, we put things in writing that need to be in writing that we wouldn't mind, but just think before you write. Does anybody have any questions about records, about anything that we didn't talk about?
I mean, I have to know, was there a text about the blueprints?
There was an email. It was an email about the blueprints. Yep.
And ...
And anything, the website's on the back too. It can be helpful. Gee, I wonder if Plainfield's ever had any about, when you type in Plainfield and it doesn't pop up, good, that sort of thing. So I encourage you to take those. And then I brought some of these are helpful too. This is what I call my meeting cheat sheet. it's a grid that tells you when meetings are going to be noticed, when minutes are due, things like that, when you can do certain things. And these could be helpful, you know, those of you who are on boards, if you have members who are not here, feel free to make copies, pass them out, and there we go. Anything else? Louisa?
Yeah, just one more thing, I wondered, this is the time for schedule of meetings.
Right.
It's coming up. Did you mention that
I
already?
did.
Okay, then I'm good, as long as you mention that. Get them straight.
All right.
Do you need a secretary when you do that?
Yes, sir.
The complete FOI document, that would be on, you can
The
see it
law.
online, you can see it online.
If you go to our website, right on the top, there's a link for the FOIA Act. Click on it, it all comes up. There's a lot of good things on there too, but like it highlights how to make a request, how to, you know, how to deal with a complaint, stuff like that, that all pops up.
One other question. So on the different commissions and boards, how is the request officially asked? So in other words, if somebody came up to me on economic development and said, an FOI request, how would
If it's for your particular emails or things like that, it would go directly to you, but if it's for the board, I would pass it along to the chairman and say, look, someone gave this to me for us, this is an FOI request for everybody.
And whose responsibility is it to get that?
It's the commission's, it's the commission as a whole. And I don't know that we would be able to pinpoint to one individual if it was for the entire commission.
And so those records, let's say the chairman, he would have to go get those records, or would he?
Well, let's suppose the request was for all emails among EDC members.
Right.
So the chairman would sort of send out something and say, hey, guys, we got this FOI request, and it would be incumbent upon the members to produce them and give them to the chairman.
And does that become a matter of public record at that time?
Yeah.
Filed, let's say?
Yeah.
Every email that you've ever written,
No, well,
or in a time?
you want a time frame. Yeah, that's one of those narrow, because some people, I should have mentioned this. Unfortunately, some people have started using this law as a weapon, as a means of getting back to people, because it's an easy law to make use of. You don't need an attorney. It's meant to be user-friendly. Some people have taken it to an extreme, and they make requests like, you know, every email since the beginning of time. Well, you know, that could be unreasonable, and we worked with the legislature to pass a law that went into effect October 1st. You might want to take a peek at it. It's Public Act 18-95, and it talks about dealing with, the word is vexatious requesters. And it talks about situations like that, where someone is abusing the process. Now, I wish for your sake, I can't tell you that it's not, you know, it's a simple, easy thing, but it's a process where we have more power to not hear some of these cases. And it also gives a public agency the right to petition the FOI Commission and say, look, this guy's made the same request for 52,000 emails 3 times, we're not gonna do it again. And the commission can say, you know what, you're right, he's abusing the process. It actually can order the individual to stay away from the agency for up to a year. That's a pretty strong step to send the message that these constant abuses of the power will not be tolerated.
Can the request, in other words, as an individual, can they come up to me at any time, or does it have to be during a meeting?
No, it can be at any time, but you can also say, hey, I'm with my family, put it in writing, you know? Yeah, yeah, I mean, look, this guy that I was telling you about with the 450 complaints, he would assault people at the supermarket, and he went after one woman when she was going to vote, you know, stuff like that. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. Yes?
As a requester, how would a requester know they're getting all the information
You don't-
that they
you
ask
don't-
for?
There has to be some level of trust. The requester has to look at it and say, this doesn't look right, and say, I don't think you've given me everything. Some requesters know that it's not everything, but there's got to be a level of trust. That's a great question. There's no hard and fast answer to that. And if a requester believes he or she has not gotten everything, they file a complaint with us and say, they gave me 20 pages, I believe there's 50. And then, you know, then the agency has to come and swear under oath that there are only 20, and then the hearing officer has to decide who's telling the truth. That's one of the good things about the commission. It can break the tie, you know. Anything else? Folks, have a great holiday season. Thank you.
Very